Good afternoon and welcome to today's Benchmark Call 2025 Budget Trends for High-Rise Communities. Please note that this call is being recorded and currently all attendees are in a listen-only mode to minimize background noise. With that, I would now like to formally begin today's call and introduce David Diestel, CEO. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Silas, and welcome everybody. Today is an important day, and thank you for joining me for the launch of Benchmark, our high-rise edition. And I want to start by sharing a story. Many years ago, I was talking to a board, self-managed, and as we were having a conversation, they had done a wonderful job in managing their costs. And as I was discussing and learning more about this community, what became evident was they wanted to elevate service at their community. And as we got to know each other better, what I learned after we shared some information, that they were well under market in terms of maintenance costs per square foot per unit. And eventually they selected us to be their management partner. And I'm thrilled today that we are still their partners in managing their community. And since then, we've elevated service at their wonderful community and continue to support them in managing costs. And that was the genesis of us sharing this information, Benchmark, the high-rise edition. And before I introduce our expert panelists with me today, I just want to take a moment to recognize those of you who serve as board members. All of you are community leaders, everyday heroes, representing the best long-term interests of all of your residents and the entire community. And through my time at FirstService, I've been fortunate to get to know many of our board members. And I can tell you it is a job that is appreciated by all the residents, and it's a balancing act. How you think about investments for the future, how you manage costs, at the same time, focus on improving the resident experience and planning for the future. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining me today. The intention of this guide is to provide you information to better inform you through your budget process across markets in the US and Canada. Often we're asked, how do our properties compare? How are we doing relative to others? So I am thrilled that we're able to do this to help that conversation with you and your residents, as well as to help our management teams with that information. So now let's get started. And first, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves. Bob, let's start with you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bob Cardoza. I am the president of our West region. So I oversee our operations in California, Nevada, and in Arizona. I also oversee our national consulting company, and I've been with FirstService Residential for 18 years.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Lee. I am Vice President of FirstService Financial. Me and my team are responsible for assisting our boards with insurance, lending, and cash management relationships. And I've been with the organization for a little over 17 years.
Hi there, Marc Kotler, President, New Development Group in New York City, and we work with developers in consulting and opening properties. I've been with the company for 20 years.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robert Smith, President of the South Region here at FirstService Residential, which is made up of the great states of Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. I'm coming up on my 7th year in the organization and just excited to be here today.
Hello, my name is Sean Ingraham. I'm the Senior Vice President for British Columbia, and I'm our Canadian representative today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Susan Ward-Freeman, the President of the High-Rise Division in the greater state of Texas, where we manage over 50 properties between DFW, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. I've been with FirstService Residential for 13 years, and prior to my role in the luxury hospitality industry. Thank everyone for joining today.
Thank you all for joining me for this important conversation. Let's get started. Robert, you're down in Florida. Recently, the Miami Herald ran a story about HOA fees on its front page, front and center. The headline said, quote, condo HOA fees jumped 60% in South Florida in the past 5 years. Higher costs are ahead. I mean, that's a very sobering headline for our boards and residents to hear. What's driving these increases? How are you and your team helping boards meet their needs in this fast-changing environment in Florida?
Well, David, first, thank you. And I would say the most significant impact on condo and HOA fees over the last 5 years has been rising insurance premiums. You add on strong wage inflation, higher costs of goods. And so you'll probably hear today a little bit about this element. The higher costs of goods are affecting reserves. And so as we get deeper into that, you'll hear more. Utilities, water, sewer, electricity, all have increased over the last 5 years. And most recently, and will have a larger impact moving forward, at least in the short term, are legislative changes here in Florida around reserve funding and building inspection requirements. How are we helping our boards? I think was the question. We've always believed our relationship with a board is a partnership, and we are providing that partnership with resources, strategies, and a vision for them to make decisions that impact their communities. And so we're assisting in the budget process. This is now an annual process of setting goals, starting early, and establishing a plan so that the board can intentionally move the community forward. Financial solutions. Our team at FirstService Financial has been helping around insurance, banking, and navigating the lending options that are available out there more than ever before. The need to make a decision on whether the association uses a special assessment or even possibly a loan is upon us. And so this is becoming more prevalent, and our teams have made a huge impact in this area. And another area that for us in assisting our associations is benchmarking. With every community being unique, benchmarking does provide knowledge of what is going on in your area by product type, expense category, as well as other similar communities and what they're doing across our region, as well as even nationally. And the role of a board member, as to David's point, has become more complex than it's ever been before. Our goal is to provide these solutions, as well as many others, that allow our boards the ability to make decisions that positively impact our communities now and into the future.
Yeah, I mean, we're right in the middle of budget process as we speak, Robert, with you and your team. Anyone else want to comment on budget process? Maybe Susan?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, David. You know, something we offer our boards at the beginning of the year is really to get together with the key players, right? The influencer that supports the association throughout the year, including myself, along with the general manager, assistant general manager, regional director, client accountant, corporate engineering, human resources, and depending really on the community's age and maybe the loss runs between their insurance renewals, sometimes we will invite our insurance and financial partners. But the first thing we do is really recap the year. How did we do? What is that kind of report card of sorts? As well as reminding the board that this is a business and they have a responsibility to manage it well, and we are there to help. How did the prior year end financially? How did they manage the asset? What projects were completed? What projects are ahead in the year that really are in accordance with the reserve study? How is our communication strategy to the residents through town halls, newsletter? What's the wage climate and associate retention look like? Benchmarking like properties and industries. We review lifestyle events, resident gatherings, resident well-being, morale. It's really important. How does the community feel about the board's leadership and the managing agent support? Are we on track for a fiscally responsible year to provide these services, really our deliverables? So we look at the budget again. So a lot can change, right, between the signed budget resolution in October and the start of the new year. And there's a possibility that there might be even new board members following maybe a fourth quarter election. And with that, sometimes we'll even incorporate a board orientation as well. But the strategic planning is really a line by line budget review with the focus on the 20 that gets us the 80. What are the landmines that we need to keep in mind on our radar? And we really want to prioritize the board's vision, at least for the first 2 quarters. We review the set monthly assessments and reserve funds kind of earmarked for those capital improvement projects. And we decide, is that still enough? Or is there a chance, right, that we need to have additional financing and plan through that, whether it's a special assessment or a loan? And so we can plan ahead. And then we check in again at the end of June, prior to really the budget season ramping up all over again. But in between those formal strategic planning meetings, we encourage our boards to schedule weekly or bi-weekly workshops where the team again reviews that ongoing action item list that updates the 80-20. And we make certain that we know who has ownership, right? Including those third-party experts, to move through the action item along with really an expectation of completion and within the budget that's designated. And we hold everyone accountable. But this really sets us up for success to stay on track throughout the year and to start thinking about the next year ahead with everyone on the same page.
Yeah, Susan, that's great advice. Strategic conversations start early in the year and keep on track. Thank you, Susan. I mean, both you and Robert talked about insurance. I'm confident that many joining us today want to hear about insurance and the market and what can be done. So, John, I'd ask you for your perspective on current insurance, what they can look forward to for 25. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad Susan and Robert talked about those strategic conversations. Certainly, we've seen an evolution in our conversations from just talking about the volatility of the insurance market to getting into more specifics about the appetites of carriers in each of those markets and what our successful communities are doing that's resonating with carriers, right? And getting them insurance. So these conversations are happening well in advance of budgeting, like Susan said, and really focus on the capital improvements and highlighting the investments that the community is making in itself to be more resilient. Some boards are making decisions to actually accelerate capital improvement projects and trade future insurance premium dollars for project work, which obviously has a benefit beyond just, insurance premium savings. So when we model and when we benchmark, it's always the communities that have made those investments in themselves that see the better carriers, the more favorable deductibles, and ultimately lower premiums. Sean, you're seeing similar trends in Canada, aren't you?
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, and this one's really close to my heart. So when you crafting that narrative for the insurance underwriters, you want to focus on resiliency, as John said, and what your community is doing to make it more attractive from a risk perspective than your neighbors. So it's capital planning, real focus on aging risers, hot water recirc lines that start developing pinhole leaks. And as John was saying, you want to be proactive in it because you want to be able to have a story to tell on why your community is better. It's an investment in natural gas shutoffs if you're in an earthquake zone. This is hopefully something you never have to use, but it's also a great narrative that makes you more attractive. And if you're talking about towers, you got to be talking about water damage. If you're in a townhome and your washing machine fails when you're away, you're going to come home and have a bad day. But if you're on the 56th floor and your washing machine fails and you're away, 56 of your neighbors are going to have a bad day, and that's going to be an insurance claim. So an emerging trend is really water sensors. These are sensors that go in high-risk areas like your laundry room, your kitchen, your bathroom. And if they detect water, they turn off the water source to your unit, to your home. And so, yes, you're probably going to have a little bit of water damage, maybe your unit, your friend below, but definitely not 56 units. And so I think we're going to see a lot of attention in this space over the next coming years. I think it's going to be a big one. Already, we're seeing some of our insurance broker partners have programs that if you have water sensors in all the homes, you get a discount on your insurance. And, as your largest line item, that's one that can have a significant impact.
Sean, I think I'm sorry, David. Sean, you touched on that work, right? And I just want to reiterate how critical it is that the inspections and the updates and the capital improvements are memorialized in reports, and that our boards are sitting with their agents and putting everything on the table well in advance of renewal and saying, this is what we've done this year. And how does this position us? And this is what our plan is for future investment. So the aim isn't just to position everybody as best in class in a hard market, but in the future too, in more forgiving markets.
Yeah, I mean, Sean and John, thank you for sharing that. Insurance costs are a significant part of budgets. In Benchmark, we note that Tampa insurance is 24% of the budget, in Miami, 21%, Las Vegas, 19%, Sean, in Vancouver, 18%. I mean, across all markets, it is such a significant spend. So your advice around being proactive and getting ahead and making operational improvements, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Let's transition to another important topic. The world has changed since the tragedy of Surfside, and reserves, we're seeing reserve contributions, a higher awareness from board members in all markets. I'd ask our panelists, what's the average you're seeing? What changes are you seeing in your market? And what can boards be thinking about in today's world? Bob, let's start with you.
Thanks, David. I would place what we're experiencing out west regarding reserves and financial impacts surrounding reserves, especially in highly regulated states like California and Nevada, where reserve allocations are mandated, right? Not an option, you must do it. We're kind of seeing three, what I would say, core themes. So I'll hit on those and then touch on how we try to support our clients in that area. One is the amount for being fully funded. And there are various opinions as to what constitutes being fully funded. Sometimes in these markets, it's kind of vague and it's left up to opinion. But nevertheless, what we're seeing is trending down over the last few years. And like other panelists have said, the second theme we see is we have enormous escalating insurance costs. And that situation is creating a need for immediate cash. That can be challenging, especially in some states under civil code. Right? It's not just easy to go out and raise your assessments or to generate the cash that you might need. So our boards are trying very hard to manage through very difficult times that have some legal constraints as to what they can and cannot do. And then finally, I would say there is this need to catch up. Right? There's this you hear the phrase reserve study inflation, and that reserve studies, they're having trouble keeping up with the huge price increases that we're experiencing today, right? The inflation rate. And that's for both the cost of the components and the equipment that you're wanting to replace and repair, as well as enormous cost increases on the labor to actually do those replacements and those repairs. So those are some of the themes that we see. And so for us in partnering with our boards, how do we go about helping them navigate through this? Well, to start with any challenging situation you have, you need awareness. And so we like to deliver awareness. They need to understand what is actually happening, really fact-based information before they can appropriately address the issue at hand. And then our clients need really good information from us. They need realistic information. It's based on sound financial data, sound advice, so that they can deliver prudent financial decisions, right? So they're aware of what's happening. They're getting really good information, and then they can move forward with decision making. And then because they have cash generation challenges, we're finding that they need access to financial solutions, as John said, right? In terms of banking, loans, and financial consultants such as FirstService Financial. They play an integral role in this. Our boards are having to get more creative than they had in the past in order to understand some of the options they have surrounding their financial needs. And then finally, David, and extremely important, is our clients need our support in resident communication, planning, and delivery. This is complicated, and it's important to make sure that residents are aware of the environment that they're in, the environment that their board is in. It's important for them to understand what their board and their management company is doing to try to navigate through these very challenging times. And so good information and good communication to the residents is really vital to keep everyone kind of on the same page. So that's kind of what I'm seeing out west. I don't know, Robert, I would ask you, does that align to what you see in the South?
Yeah, Bob, I mean, it's actually a good point. And the more I thought about it, out here, east, we're starting to come more in towards those legislative mandates that you've been experiencing out there for a while. Two trends that we're definitely seeing are the legislative impacts on reserve contributions and having to actually mandate the contribution. And then the other is just board members increasing contributions, understanding that it's now really considered a best practice. And so just watching those two trends transpire are very interesting. And so because of that, we're experiencing 15% to over 100% increases depending on their specific situation and how they've been handling reserve funding in the past. And one interesting note is, we have seen that there were many luxury communities out here that handled capital expenses and rising costs with special assessments, and were able to maintain the standards of their community. But as those communities now transition to the new requirements, they continue to feel like they have it under control, and they do. But as FirstService Residential, we have to also be sensitive to that and understand that there are changes still occurring, and how do we navigate through that. And then other situations, just simply in addition to budgeting and preventative maintenance plans, we are now helping boards with transparency by creating communication plans to owners in order to educate them on what is really happening in their community. And the goal is, and always has been, that the community is healthy, safer, and more stable than it was before. And so exciting times, looking forward to it, but definitely we're moving towards these legislative mandates.
Thank you, Robert. And, we touched on across the board, we are seeing across all markets, reserve contributions increasing, largely driven by costs that Bob spoke about, certainly some legislative changes. I think it's worth also noting the importance of preventive maintenance programs, and how should boards think about that? How should our management teams think about that? And I know we've got some programs. Susan, would you like to speak about what you're doing?
Sure. Thanks, David. Just to add to that, we've alluded a lot to the importance of asset management in general, and making certain that there is a really accountable tracking system for the care of your asset from the inside out in accordance to your reserve study. So our Vice President of Facility Management in Texas is heavily involved with the on-site maintenance teams, including the hiring, the training, the educating, the overseeing of the on-site preventative maintenance plan program. And he inspects our buildings a couple of times a year, and that feeds into this living, breathing reserve study that, based on preventative maintenance, may add or subtract an asset replacement through extended life. But as Bob said, right, it is really important if a project is pushed back or is because of the life of the equipment is extended, that all those cost increases really have to be taken into consideration. And of course, materials and labors, not just the replacement, but the process of replacement, right? So street closures, crane services, permits, water shutoff, et cetera, all the things in anticipation that the project from start to finish. And Bob also spoke to this in regards to reserve study inflation and possible pitfalls of understanding future reserve funds if they're delayed. At the same time, we always look at the ways to mitigate common risks through emergency preparedness. So both Bob and Sean and John spoke about, water detection systems, which are really important. But it's funny, an example of benchmarking and best practices. We did a case study at one of our properties in Las Vegas, where a contractor accidentally hit a sprinkler head on the 24th floor of a 20-story building. So we all can envision what that is, which deployed the fire pump. And by the time the water was shut off 25 minutes later, it was estimated that every minute cost $75,000. So close to a $2 million claim. And that's when FirstService Residential introduced a proprietary DOT system, which will guide anyone in the building to shut off certain pieces of equipment, which is installed now on many of our high-rise properties. So it's important that the managing company, the managing agent, is sharing those best practices and bringing solutions to the customer.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. What a story. Susan, you touched on projects. We talked about capital projects, funding reserves. Let's spend a minute talking about how associations today are thinking about funding capital projects. And Sean, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, David. Yeah, so it changes depending on where you are in North America, but there's four main ways of funding those capital projects. One is special assessments. I think that's officially the least like option. But then there's using reserves, and if you've got healthy reserves, that's definitely the you're doing it right if you're using those solely. As government programs, and then there's also financing that comes into play. And then you don't have to use specifically just one of them. So recently we helped a client with using a mixture of them. They had a large envelope project they had to do. And so they did a special assessment for a portion of it. The city actually, due to a program, put in some money. And then also they used some of their reserves. And this allowed them to keep their reserves healthy, but also minimize the impact on the owners from the special assessment. But what we're seeing now is more and more people and boards are looking to financing. And because that's a real viable option, especially if you're having to see significant operating costs go up at the same time. John, you are the expert in financing. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure, Sean. Thank you. So, I mean, just this is all about planning, right? We're seeing an uptick in lending activities for communities that, like Sean said, either don't have the cash on hand or don't want to spend it. So, what we've established is a very scripted process to ensure that the association's financial position is optimal and it's presented in the most positive light to potential lenders. It's like planning to take the association out to market for a loan. One example of this is planning for additional costs that'll arise later, but still during the life of a loan. So you may have a 10-year loan with a project due in 7 years, and we work through what's the plan for that project while we're still repaying the loan. So certainly the good work our team does will examine those options and include using cash on hand and straight special assessment, but many of the larger projects will call for loans. And just keep in mind that Fannie and Freddie do have their requirements for those buildings that are looking for Fannie and Freddie mortgages, and they require a deep dive into the financial and physical condition of the association to lend to potential buyers. So it's important to keep those in mind, and I've even seen some boards use those requirements as part of a strategic planning process and fold into a 5-year plan.
Thank you, John. I'd like to transition now to another large spend at communities, utilities. And I'd ask Marc Kotler, who spends a lot of time in New York. Utilities are such a large share of high-rise associations. And I'm here today joining you from Toronto, where we manage over 800 high-rise buildings right here in the city. When we look at high-rise budgets, for example, in Toronto, every dollar, about a quarter, goes to utilities. And that seems like a substantial amount for any association. But in New York, with local law 97 and other regulations in place, including fines, could you speak to what you see in New York utilities, how you work with those high rises in that market?
Sure. Thank you, David. So I'll start with the long term. So local law 97 is a well-intentioned law that was put in place to reduce the carbon footprint of buildings in New York City. And every building is different. They have different systems, different facades, and so all that comes into play as to their carbon footprint and usage of utilities. But the law states that we have to reduce certain things by certain dates, and using FirstService Energy as a resource has been just so helpful for us, or so instrumental in coming up with a plan to address this law for each of our properties. So in conjunction with using a third-party engineer, they looked at it, all these properties and come up with a long-term plan on how to get their carbon footprint reduced. Because if you don't reduce it by a certain time, there could be huge fines. So the key here is long-term planning and coming up with that roadmap of how to reduce the carbon footprint in time to not incur those fines. And it has been a pleasure working with them in terms of getting buildings a real picture as to where they're going to be going in the next 10, 20, 30 years. In the short term, Budgeting of utilities is so important. Listen, we have to buy water, gas, electric, whatever fossil fuels we're using for the building, but there's nuances to it. And, FirstService Energy is constantly looking at and researching utility tariffs across the board. And they're also looking at utility bills 3 years running for a building and making sure there's no errors in there. And through their research and, just with a lot of knowledge of what's happening in the energy market, they help us in creating the forecast for our budgets for our buildings. And it's much more scientific method than just looking at, the past X amount of years and applying X amount of increase to it. So having that type of, superpower knowledge, behind our decision making is really important. And our boards really appreciate the fact that we do this in a knowledgeable way.
Yeah, I love that you said superpower. Is that right, Mark? Can we quote you on
Yes.
that? Yeah, FirstService Energy team certainly is. And I'll just remind everybody, certainly in deregulated markets, New York, Texas, Chicago, there are more options available to residential associations. Certainly. Thank you. Now, we've been addressing our board members, homeowner boards since we started this conversation. I'd like to transition to the work we also do with developers to help them balance how they build the communities of the future, how to balance costs, service levels, certainly the marketing and project success that they have their own vision, bringing their vision to life. Bob, I'd ask you in terms of designing solutions, working with developers before they even break ground. What are you hearing from developers you work with when it comes to budgeting and costs?
Yeah, thanks, David. Well, I'm sure that what I see in the West is similar to what everyone else is seeing. So maybe I'll tee up some of the bigger picture, and then we'll let some of the other panelists fill in the picture with some details. But in my experience, our developer and builder partners, David, what they desire most from us is knowledge and information, right? And we have an abundance of that because of our experience and our geographic footprint. Just look at this screen and you get these subject matter experts that are covering North America. And as you said, David, when you manage 800 buildings in Toronto or 800 buildings in New York, you have an abundance of really good information that is important to developers. So what I have found is that, whether it's land developers or home builders, they all have a vision, right, for the experience that they want their residents to have when they're going to live in their building. What are they seeing? What are they doing? What are, what amenities and what lifestyle and what value is being brought to them? They're all thinking about what makes a consumer want to spend their hard-earned money and purchase a unit in their building. How do they attract them to do that? And then they need to know this way up front. What does that particular vision cost? Because all of them are then balancing that cost against the realities of marketing and selling the units. So they have this vision, they have this thought of what they want to do. We bring to them realistic information of what it's going to take to actually deliver on that vision in terms of kind of management structures and the financial costs to do that. That's where it really all begins. They're matching that financial cost to the vision they have, to their ability to market and sell units in the market in which they are doing that. And that can be a complicated process. So it's been a big picture what I see, but I'm curious, Susan, in a place like Texas, what is your experience there?
So very, very similar. I think that the most important thing that we do when we sit down with a developer for the very first time is to really understand their vision. What is it that they want that buyer to feel emotionally, and how they want to carry that through to, that creates their own brand within the community. And, recently one of our developers created a transition concierge, right, that assists with that punch list warranty issues through the first year and maybe extended warranty and beyond. But I think the developers are really looking for a way to define their own brand, be better, really distinctive in creating something that will uniquely drive the sales, like you said. And I think that the more of that emotional connection with the buyer that makes them move-in experience easy and memorable, because then the experience in the property will have legs on it, but it will drive them to a development specifically by XYZ developer. So maybe they will want to seek out that developer in the future, or they're compelled to share their move-in experience with others that look for that specific developer for their next home.
Susan, I think we all are experiencing the same thing, but what I've found working with our developers is that the new home buyer actually matters. The buyer's experience is important. It drives the overall success of the community. Service level enhancements. So how do we create a more efficient, but also a more concierge type experience? And then use of technology and innovation, making it an easier to do business with inside the building. And then modern practical amenities, as well as proper staffing, are also critical for a new community. The move from a tactical approach to creating a more emotional experience, so how it makes you feel, is where new communities are now starting to trend. That final monthly, quarterly assessment amount must be in the market, no doubt. But building a plan centered on the owner's experience has been crucial in setting up the community right from day one.
Yeah, Robert, thank you.
Can I add, Bob? Sorry, David.
No, I was going to say, Mark, that you and I have been working with a developer on their projects in New York. Maybe touch on that.
Sure. I think I agree with everything that everyone said, but our involvement getting in early is really so important, because during the design process, how the building is designed, the entrances, how people pick up their mail, their packages, how is trash taken out of the building, this all has effect on the cost of operating the property. And if we can get in early and have a say in how the building is designed and how we can implement technology to help offset some of those or enhance some of those experiences, it's going to help in the long run. Listen, it's a very delicate process in terms of massaging the common charges and the real estate taxes for a building, because it's expensive to run these luxury projects, and you have to understand the vision of the marketing and sales team as well as the ownership of the building in service versus keeping costs down. But I think it's really important that we have a vision from everyone involved, and we can apply that to the budget as we create it for the first year of operation.
Yeah, I mean, thank you all. In speaking with many of our developer clients, they do care about project success, their brand, repeat buyers. Most of our developer clients are building multiple projects. So that buyer experience for the future is critically important to them. And, we in talking about new development, I think it's also worth talking about how our existing communities, some older communities, or what they're also doing to renovate their own shared spaces, to help keep up with perhaps new development, or just to modernize their own community, continue to have residents feel proud to have selected that community, and also how they're investing, how are they looking at improving the resident experience. So I think let's spend a few minutes talking about that. What are we seeing in terms of amenity spaces? What are you seeing boards do across your markets?
David, maybe I'll jump in. So my advice to my clients is the exact same for developers. So it works for both. And that's really to think multi-use and then the emerging trend of wellness. So what I mean by multi-use is don't have that space just dedicated to one discipline. So a good example is pickleball courts. I know you're a pickleball guy. They're the same size. The court size is the same as a badminton's double court. So if you're going to put pickleball in, you're going to renovate an area, also make it flex to badminton, so you can use that same spot and offer to residents more variety. Soundproof rooms are a big trend right now. Lets people, your daughter can practice violin and not annoy the neighbors. You can have a music room area, studying, you got your SATs coming up and you need to study for them. Nice, that same quiet room. And then media rooms. My kids are posting videos on their apps. And so a well-lit soundproof room is definitely a desirable amenity to them. And that can all be the same area. My favorite though is a craft room. So a craft room is a big stainless steel sinks, big tables, either wood or also made out of metal, easy cleanup with some floor drains. And this can be used by like people that are into all these little niche hobbies or just wide variety of things. You think of charcoal drawings or claymation, scrapbooking. I had to do the science experiment with my kids where that volcano with baking soda blows up. I'd sure like to do it in a hobby room instead of my living room. Makes cleanup a lot easier. And so you design these amenities that can be used for different things, give more your residents more options. It's definitely the way to go. And then the other one is wellness. We're seeing lots of barrel saunas, plunge pools, cold water going back and forth, meditation areas, Tai Chi pavilions, just quiet landscaped areas, maybe with a little water feature. It's always encouraging when you're touring a building and you find that little quiet landscaped area and someone's on a bench reading a book, or maybe they're stretching out on a nice landscaped area. So I just think that, amenities don't always have to be rock and roll. And it's important to always include some peaceful and some wellness in there. But every once in a while, you do maybe want something on the cutting edge, or maybe a cup of coffee. And then, Robert, that's where you come in with food and beverage, right?
Yes. I love badminton. That's a great one. So what I'm seeing is spaces that promote socialization. And you were touching on it, craft rooms, doing different things, bringing people together. So connectivity. I also feel obligated to say pickleball has become a big deal. It has become a big deal. We're seeing it in urban living as well as suburban living. So definitely we're seeing more of that. And as I mentioned earlier, the owner experience is important. So we're seeing the addition of food and beverage with grab-and-go centers, coffee bars, wine bars, even full-scale restaurants. And that's bringing people together in a building that wasn't maybe originally designed for that type of connectivity, but bringing that service to the owners. Technology and innovation, smart buildings, starting to bring more technology into the building so that we can work more efficiently, but we also can connect easier throughout the building. And then concierge services. As packages are becoming more prevalent, upgrading your package room or even adding a package room, but then also delivering it personally, having personal delivery with your packages. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention pets. Pet services, pet grooming, areas that you can walk your dog are all becoming significant when our buildings are starting to renovate space.
Yeah, Robert, thank you. You did remind me of, what I refer to as the 4 Ps: people, pets, packages, and parking. And if you get that right, and it's a great way, my advice to our teams and boards is just think in those dimensions. What are you doing to improve resident lifestyle in all of those areas? And, one of the trends I learned from Marc Kotler when I was touring some properties was around people, and the new demand as people work in their communities, work from home has become a thing, is privacy. So I'm thinking about adding the 5th P to that. But that maybe, Marc, you could just speak to, in New York City, what are you seeing around privacy? And it's not an amenity, but considering that, what should boards think about?
Well, we just opened a new building, and they actually built in a lot of spaces where people can have private meetings or even a private dinner party and those type of things. So it's taking these larger spaces and making them flexible so they can be used into smaller spaces. I would say in some of our older properties, like, for example, I opened a property about 18 years ago that, beautiful luxury property, but 18 years down the road, it's competing with some newer properties. So they were thinking how to enhance their amenities, which was somewhat limited, but there's commercial space in the building that was vacant. So they decided we're going to rent out that commercial space and convert it into a community lounge with a dining area. And so they really thought creatively, and they added a little cost on operating the building, but they created a beautiful amenity that everyone can use. So I think in thinking of how to enhance some of these more mature properties, you have to be very creative.
Okay. I'd ask you all, our panelists, to think about a word of advice for everybody here today. But before we get there, just think about your last words of advice. I do want to thank and acknowledge both our management teams for everything they do each and every day to serve our communities. And I started off today by thanking our board members for their service to their communities. And I am so proud and grateful to be the management partner to so many communities. Nobody manages more high-rise communities than we do. And to bring our expertise, leverage our scale across neighborhoods in the US and Canada, I'm eternally grateful for that and the impact we have on people's homes, in their lives, and just being the part of the fabric of where people call home and these communities. And so I hope you're all hearing a big thank you from me for everything you all do each and every day. So before we close, I'm going to go back and ask each of you for one piece of advice for everyone joining today. Let's start with you again, Bob.
Thank you, David. You know, the piece of advice that I would give surrounds mindset. An HOA does not have to be thought of as an obligation or a negative perspective. It can be an opportunity, a very positive environment. A well-planned, a well-operated building can deliver a wonderful experience for people. And it can also help them, like Marc touched on, sustain market value, which is important to people. The key is to have this mindset very early on, so that when you're planning the building, you're thinking about that vision, that you're looking into how you can extract the value that's there, the opportunity that's there. Because if you do that during the beginning planning stages, then that can just be a wonderful part of the process of what you're delivering to a resident, versus having to backtrack and try to crowbar other stuff in after you're well along the way. So I think, you know, mindset, it's an opportunity, not an obligation.
Thank you, Bob.
I'll jump in. I think we spent a lot of time today talking about investment and investing in our communities. And I think it's really important for our boards to lean on their professional partners to help identify the orders of magnitude that investment will have. I mentioned earlier communities that invest in themselves see more favorable insurance rates, but there's a lot of cascading effects. There's those investments free up dollars to fund reserves down the line. They can provide energy savings, and we touched also on resale value, you know, driving those up by investing in the community. So making those big investments can be a lot less challenging when boards can communicate all of the elements of a community that investment can touch in a positive way.
I'll jump in, David. My advice to both boards and to developers would be to be honest and realistic. I think it's really important to understand the position that a building could be in, or where you want it to be when you're planning it, and be really realistic as to know if your budget is going to be able to carry the cost of that building for the year, because you don't want to go through a year and be in a deficit position where you have to raise common charges significantly the next year. So if you're prudent and you're being realistic, you're going to be able to have smaller increases year over year, and I think that everyone would appreciate that.
I'm going to say start now. Create a plan with a 3 to 5 year focus, setting a vision for the future. If not, you do tend to react on an annual basis and aren't truly able to invest for the future of your community. So start now.
I'll go. You're not alone. You know, we look after a lot of communities, and you may have some unique challenges, but there's other communities that have gone and through the same thing. We have a really deep team with a lot of expertise, and so you're not alone, and we're here to help.
Yeah, and I also think, you know, just we talked a little bit about it, right? Be prepared, be proactive. You know, budget season is not a short-term process, right? Start early, as Robert said, review the action item list frequently, reforecast often, right? Know where you are financially throughout the year, and use the resources that your managing agent has to offer, right? Locally, regionally, nationally. As Sean said, you're not in it alone. Ask for help.
Thank you all. And last advice from me, my advice to board members is just to engage with your residents and lean on us and our team as your partners. Realistic, we're there alongside you as you continue to drive positive change in your communities. Let us help you with that communication, and Benchmark is part of that as well. What are other communities doing? And the same for our management teams. Our community managers at property, serving our boards, utilize the experts. That is the difference we make at FirstService Residential in simplifying lives for so many. And we're grateful for being the management partner to so many wonderful communities. So with that, thank you all for joining us today. It is an important day as we launch Benchmark. We hope you found our time together valuable and insightful to all of you and your communities. Thank you all.
Thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you all in the audience. With that, our call is now concluded and you may disconnect.